Angie Kim, where are you right now?
Hi, I'm coming to you from Northern Virginia. This is my writing closet where
Yeah,
it
and
is,
I
it's
am
so
in
small. Yeah, where are
I'm
you?
in Los Angeles in my
Yeah.
in my office actually. So,
Oh,
but yes, so we are not anywhere in the UK, but welcome to this Fane online event for Angie Kim's Happiness Falls. I think we're calling this the online or the launch of the book in the UK, which is so it's an
right.
exciting
Yes.
time.
Oh, thank you so much. And also, can I just say how beautiful your office is? I'm like having room envy at like the books
Well, I
behind
will
you.
say that when I started like doing a lot of promotion for tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, I did have the thought that I'm going to have to sit in front of something a lot, So
Yeah.
I did at that point somewhat style the room so that it looked like, that it at least has one really good side.
Oh, I love it. It's so great.
Uh,
And I love the flowers and like, and also seeing my book in your office. It makes me, I want one of the things that I want to tell you before we even began, but I kind of saved it for now, is because I think it's a funny story. Is I was going around because I wanted to have tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow behind me. And I was going around. I have like three copies, and I was like, where are all of my copies? So it turns out like my kids have all of them because I've been talking about it, and they're also like, one of them is a CS major who does like computer game design and things like that, and his girlfriend does too, so he actually took two of them. So, and then one of them who is not a CS guy, but still like loves great books, he stole the other one. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I should have looked for that yesterday, not this morning.
likely story,
But isn't that cool that like my kids who are
Yeah,
college
it is so
students,
cool. It's
yeah,
so
and like
cool.
and
Yeah.
the CS major and his girlfriend have not even read Happiness Falls. So, like
I am
it's
sorry
funny.
about that.
Yes. Thank you.
But they should read Happiness Falls,
I think
It's a book
so.
that the
Yes.
author of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow strongly loved. So, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah,
So, at
great.
first, I think we should tell them a little bit about what the book is about.
Yes.
I find it actually quite difficult to synopsize things. So, but the bare bones of the story, it's the story of Adam,
Yes.
Carson, who goes missing while on a walk with his neurodivergent son, Eugene, and how his family tries to find him. The story is told from the perspective of Mia, Eugene's older sister, who is very clever and occasionally quite discursive. I think it's a missing person story, but the reason I love it is because it's really a story about language. The center of the story is a biracial family. What more can we say? But we'll get to all of those things later.
We
And
will, but can
let's
I
talk about the book.
say, okay, yes, but can I just say that like I love that you just did the synopsis for me because I've been sitting here going like, okay, I have to like give the same, spiel, the
I dread
elevator
it. I
spiel.
dread it when I'm doing an event. I'm so relieved when the other person has taken that off of my plate of things to do. I don't
I
know why. So I
really,
give you this gift,
I love it.
sizing the book.
You have been giving me many gifts this morning. So or morning for you, afternoon for me, but I'm very, very grateful. So thank you so much for doing that. Yeah, what a huge relief. Okay, so
um,
let's talk about
Well,
whatever.
the last time we saw each other, we were in Los Angeles and we did an
Yes.
event at Zibby's bookstore there. And after that, I know you traveled for many, many more months. You had like the longest book tour in the world. So, how are you? You have been traveling all over the place. And then I want you to tell me before we get into the book, and we're really going to get into it, just something amazing or weird from your travels.
From my travels. So I'll tell you something amazing that happened right after I saw you, which is in
No,
San
I missed it.
yeah, so in San Diego in La Jolla, I did this like amazing event where I was in conversation with one of my beta readers who is a non-speaker and who is autistic, named Otto, and he's 18 and he's so bright, and he like really helped me with some of the some of the things that I struggled with as far as like, you know, calling people nonverbal, even though they're not, it turns out they're not really nonverbal. They're just not speaking, but they are
Right.
actually hyperverbal, you know, like things like that, that he really helped me think through. So to be in conversation with him and to have this like unbelievable audience that was so supportive and so patient as he kind of like wrote, you know, his questions and responses using this letterboard and having to like spell out words one by one very slowly and carefully. It was like the most magical experience. And so like I loved things like that. So that was really really cool. And yeah, and I got home I think on like November 20th after traveling like nonstop for like 2 months or something. And then I was like, I am so exhausted right now. So I basically just like did nothing but sleep and just stay in my pajamas and not shower and, you know, and basically like answered mail and paid bills and did things like that for like a couple of months, really. I'm still like cleaning
Basically,
up.
as I have a mathematical formula for this, which is that as long as the book tour lasts, it will take you as many weeks to recover from that book tour.
That is brilliant. You're totally right because you're absolutely right. And then the other thing is my tour, even though my tour has been you know, like over, I've also done something like 90 book clubs, like Zooms and
Oh
stuff
my God,
since
that's a
then.
lot. That's a
Yeah.
lot. That's a lot.
So I love doing book clubs for Miracle Creek. So when, you know, people like first reached out when about Happiness Falls and that kind of like booked me before the book even came out, I was like, yes to everything. And then afterwards, I was like so happy to be talking to people, but at the same time, like a little bit like exhausted, like I'm kind of sick of my book and I don't want to talk about it anymore. So having that break over the holidays where I was like away and not even thinking about anything was really, really good. But I like that formula and I'm gonna definitely have to keep that in mind. I like it a
Well,
lot.
it's an interesting thing. I've become happier as a novelist when I realized that the person who promotes the books, the extrovert, has nothing to do with the introvert who writes them, you know, and that you kind of just have to flip it off like a switch.
Yes.
And you have to find a place in yourself where you can be the rodeo clown who, who enjoys talking to people. And then
Yeah.
that switch is turned off and I don't ever want to talk to anyone again, you know, but
Yeah.
I have found a place in myself where I can enjoy the fact that I'm good at or have improved at that part of that job, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is though that and I really am missing writing. So I have not
Yes, you do. You
really,
miss it
you
at
know, I really miss
yeah.
it. Like I was just desperate. Like the one day that the first day that I was actually in here and I was like, I'm gonna do nothing. I'm just gonna free write for a bit. And I was just like near tears because I was like, I am so happy to be writing. And this is my real job. Like, this is my real passion. This is why I do this. And as much as I love like meeting people and readers and meeting other authors and going to fun parties and all that, like, that's really like being in this, like, you know, ridiculous closet that I'm in and sitting on the floor and
Where
just
they keep you, apparently.
yes,
Does it have
exactly.
windows,
They do.
Angie? Can you get out?
Well, I kept myself because you know, this was like my place to go. This was like my haven where nobody could find me. Where like my kids were like, "Where's mom?" You know, when they were littler and they were actually around the house, they would be like, "Where's mom?" And they would be like, "I don't even know where she could be." And so I kept this like
You're
a
basically you're the reverse Harry Potter. You know what I mean? Like in
yes,
the cupboard under the stairs.
yes,
Except you're not being
yes.
forced there. You have forced yourself there, basically.
Absolutely. No. And I call this my Harry Potter broom closet because it does have this like slope down ceiling. So I can't even, that's why I'm sitting on the floor because I can't even stand up.
It's
So
funny. I didn't see the sloped ceiling, but I felt it. I felt emotionally that you had a slope in that room somehow.
exactly.
So
Exactly. That's why you
we
said
should
Harry
talk
Potter.
a a little bit
Yes.
about the book, we should do
Yes.
that because we are
Yes.
professional people that are going to
We
talk about the
are.
book. I will
Absolutely.
say, there are many books I've read, and I think beginnings are incredibly difficult. And I think the beginning of your book has, some of the most classic lines that I have certainly encountered recently in a new novel. And the
Oh,
lines are, "We didn't call the police right away," which I think is such a great setup for the whole book because it sets up all these questions like, why are we calling the police? And
right.
why didn't we do it immediately?
Right.
And so I have a question that is narrative about this.
Yeah.
Why don't you think they called the police right away?
So, I mean, so they didn't call the police right away because, first of all, Mia was the 20-year-old narrator, who is very self-absorbed, as, many 20-year-olds are. She's home. And one of the things that she comes to realize, and that we come to realize, I think, throughout the book, is that when you are that age, and when you are telling the story from like seeing the world from the child's perspective, you don't really think of your parents as real people. You kind of have expectations. They're kind of there in the background. They almost become part of the setting, right? And they're kind of like these blobs. And so the expectation that he's there and taking care of, her little brother who's 14, who has Angelman syndrome and who has autism and who needs a lot of care, that expectation is so strong that she doesn't actually notice that he's not there. She just takes all these clues that she sees and hears, and she just assumes that those are all the dad, even though she doesn't actually see him around and things like that. So I think from that perspective, that's why she doesn't notice it. And then the family kind of goes along with the assumption that they have from what Mia has been telling them, which is, yeah, he got home like hours ago. So he's somewhere around. I don't know where he is, but he's definitely here,
Right. Right. It's
And so
just
they don't
it's
realize.
actually just the privilege of having had a family that was fairly stable, that you presume they will fill their roles and do exactly the things you will expect them to, which is kind of the problem of all of the characters in the novel in many ways. I'm curious though, in terms of the process, and I don't know if we talked about this the last time we talked, but were the first lines of the novel the first thing that you wrote? Like, did you write, or did you come to them later in the process?
Yeah, so I think I actually wrote we didn't call the police right away during my first real writing session. So I don't know if you're like
Yeah.
this, but I've been basically like, this story has been in incubation mode for, like had been in incubation mode for like 3 years or something like that before I
And I think you
actually.
don't want to shorten that part of the process. I'm a big
No.
believer in it. That in fact, it's like the rehearsal before you get to the play. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like
exactly.
you need to start warming things up, and it's kind of, actually, it's more like the sound of the orchestra tuning up, like that
Yeah.
sound when you
Well,
sit down,
definitely. I
yeah.
mean, I think people think of writing as like this long process of, having the luxury of, um, being able to like change things after you write them. So in that way, it's not really like a live performance. But I actually think that it's more like that for me because I do tend to like do a lot of free writing and a lot of trying voices out and things like that. And then I like one day I was like, okay, I need to start writing and I'm going to start writing from chapter one and, trying out various things. And I think it was within the first hour or so during free writing that I came across the line that I wrote, we didn't call the police right away. And I was like, that should be the first line. And it's funny because I
Yeah.
didn't know, at that, when I wrote that, I didn't know why they hadn't called the police right away. I didn't exactly know what they were supposed to be calling the police about. So all of these things just kind of came together. And then the other thing that I think about that first line is that this is a missing person story, but I think it's also a coming of age. Um,
Yeah.
and and Mia, like you can feel the regret that she has in making that her first line of her story to us, to say,
And
it's almost like
it's
a
so great
confession.
too. Like one other thing that I love about the line, which I've never told you, is the fact that it starts with we, because this is going to
Yeah,
be, largely a first person story. It's not it's not a story
yeah,
told from a we perspective. And yet the
right,
we is still part of her. It's the story of this family. And I like what you just said, because when I think of the book, I don't think of it as, you can think it's just the story of this missing father. And I think actually that's super interesting to have the story of a missing father. We're so used to just girls and moats, or something
right.
like a girl by the side of the
Absolutely.
river. Like of course we all know the number of books that had girl in the title that involved some kind of
Exactly.
missing woman, but this is the
Yeah.
story of a missing man. But I actually think that it is the story of two missing people, insofar as it's the story of a father who was missing, but it's also the story of a son who is missing in many ways, and I don't know if you saw it that way at all.
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't think it was until later that I sort of, when I was thinking about it, that I just sort of thought, I really feel like that it is a coming of age for her, but also a coming of age for the family as a whole. And it is that
Yeah.
missing person. It's finding, Eugene, helping him to find, his words and his voice, if you will, but like even more than that, his connection to the family and to the entire outside world. Like how do you actually connect to people if you can't speak, because speech is such a huge part of our society, and how we
Right.
connect to people. And so, that is definitely something that was always at the core of the story for me, and one of the reasons why I wanted to write a story about, Eugene.
Well, it's something, I think one of the reasons the book resonated with me so much is because it is about language. Something you have in common with my mom is that my mom came from Korea, not speaking English when she was 9, and it's something I've read you talk about. It's something that the book is about, the ways in which people do not understand the ways that we privilege language,
Yeah.
and you can say it a lot more elegantly than I can.
No, 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 not at all. But I mean, you just said it very elegantly. But I mean,
I mean,
but
just the
and I
presumption
was
that, again, that somebody who doesn't speak well is not intelligent. We see it all the
exactly.
time. How many jokes that there are about people from other countries that are jokes that are about accents, even, if you think about things like
Absolutely.
that.
And also the way that we call it broken English when, when people do use an accent that we consider foreign and alien and things like that. And yeah, and like your mom, I came over to the US from Korea, from Seoul, when I was 11. So, I was a little tiny bit older, but I was in middle school. And yeah, that experience was so hard. And it's something that I really didn't talk about and really kind of had hidden away for a long, long time. And this is another thing that I think is really interesting that you asked me before, like, what are some of the highlights of this, tour that I did? When I would go to different cities and I would like meet up with college friends or law school friends or whatever, and they would come to some of my bookstore talks, they would be like, I didn't even realize that you had those feelings and those experiences. I think I was ashamed of it, so ashamed of it that I hid it away. And so what I hid away is the fact that I came over from, Korea when I was 11. I didn't speak English at all. And I knew that it was going to be logistically challenging. Of course, my parents had warned me, like, we need to teach you some basic words like bathroom and, things like that.
Right.
But, but the most important thing that I didn't realize until I went through it was how much shame I would feel and embarrassment, because that didn't even make sense to me that I would feel that way. But then when I went through it, I really felt it. And I think for the first time, I realized that we as a society have this very deeply rooted assumption that, equates oral fluency with intelligence. And I felt that certainly within myself. So when I couldn't speak, even though it was for a totally understandable reason that I had prepared myself for, I still felt so much shame. I felt like a pabo. I felt like a stupid person who was stripped of all intelligence. And then the other thing that I learned, like over the following year, is that when you can't speak, people assume that you can't understand. So
Right.
when I could, like, I picked up receptively, English pretty well. And so I could understand what people were saying, but I still couldn't speak it very well. People were talking about me in front of me, even as they were kind of like smiling and acting like they were being friendly toward me. And so that was like another like huge, stage of humiliation that I think I went through. And that's I think one of the reasons why I didn't really want to talk about it. And I wanted to kind of hide it away, even from myself. And it wasn't until I was much older and I came across a group of people who are non-speakers, who, by virtue of autism or cerebral palsy or whatnot. And then we realized that they had been categorized as, quote unquote, nonverbal and quote unquote cognitive, disability. And then some of them, who are my friends' kids, started being able to communicate by using these letter boards. And then the beautiful thoughts that came out of them, I think I was just kind of like shaken by that experience. And that made me think back to what I had gone through, and the fact that like what I went through was nothing compared to what these people are going through, lifelong,
Right.
conditions, and not knowing if they're ever going to be able to communicate with the world and connect.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I don't know if you want to take a second to describe Angelman syndrome before
Mm.
we, in terms of, I don't know if I'm as equipped to to describe what that
Yeah,
is as you are.
sure, absolutely. So Angelman syndrome, um, you know what? I'm gonna tell it to you. I don't know if I told you this before, Gabrielle. Um, I I feel like I wanna describe to you like the process by which I discovered Angelman syndrome, because it's kind of a cool story. It's one of these like gifts from the writing gods kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what happened was this family and Mia had been with me for a long time. I had actually written a short story about them in Mia's voice, um, back when the family was in Korea, like back, and it was published in like 2013, so like more than 10 years ago. And so then the boys kind of stayed with me and the family stayed with me and the kids kind of grew up in my mind as my kids grew up and all that kind of stuff. So all that happened. And then and I had always thought of Eugene as being autistic and non-speaking, but even in the short story I had always described him as having motor issues and always having this beatific smile and like never crying. And so Mia describes him as the world's happiest baby and being unusually drawn to water. And what else? And not speaking. So all of these things. And then I was doing some research about these spelling therapies much later. And I came across the fact that, like, some of these therapists were actually focusing on kids with Angelman syndrome, among other things like autism and cerebral palsy. And I was like, what is Angelman syndrome? So I looked it up, and immediately the Mayo Clinic description of Angelman syndrome was,
Was what you had
motor
written. Yeah.
issues. Yeah, it's a rare genetic condition that's characterized by motor issues, by persistent sort of beatific smiles on their faces, lots of laughing, and so outwardly happy, being unusually drawn to water, and most of the time not being able to speak. So I was like, well, this is Eugene,
Do you
and
think somewhere you had ever heard about it somewhere, or do you
I
think it
don't
was like more miraculous than
I
that,
think it's I don't know if it's miraculous, because I tend not to believe in things like that, but I think I kind of do when it comes to writing more than in my other, parts of my life. I don't think I've ever heard it before, because as soon as I saw the word Angel Man, I was like, that is such an intriguing thing. I have to figure out exactly what it is. And there were like a whole bunch of other things listed also. Like, it wasn't just Angelman syndrome, it was like other things too. And so it really like leapt out at me. So I feel like I would remember that if I had heard of it before.
And in a way, I think sometimes when you're writing, and you can research a lot, but you don't know everything. And especially when you're starting out, you're kind of even finding the things you might go research. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think sometimes things that feel like the truth because they are truthful,
Yeah.
And so in
Yeah.
a sense, you put together a thing that sounds like a person, and then it
Totally.
turns out that there are people that have things like that have this sort of medical situation, if that's the
Yeah.
right way to refer to it.
Yeah. No, definitely.
It's interesting. Something that both of our books share on the subject of Eugene is like the drama of the child with medical issues and how it sort of takes over and becomes the organizing principle of the entire family's ecosystems.
Definitely.
And I thought that was really interesting. The whole family in Happiness Falls is set up in a way to like with Eugene as the center of it, and it becomes this kind of huge source of resentment for his siblings really at times, and
Yeah,
especially Mia,
absolutely.
I would say.
One of the things that I wanted to do, Miracle Creek, my first book, I think, it sort of revolves around some of the same issues. And this role, the concept of there being outsiders that are sort of outside the outsiders in terms of medical context and outsiders in terms of linguistic and cultural and those types of things as well. But in Miracle Creek, I really looked at everything from the parenting angle, and so from here, I really
Yeah.
wanted to sort of like see the flip side of the coin, like really look at it from the child's angle and the children's, the siblings and the child himself. And I think one of the things that happens when there is like a big visible disability or disease or condition like there is with Eugene, um, I think some of the other quirks that the other kids have kind of get dismissed away. So like Mia tells us
Yeah.
that when she was younger she was hyperlexic, and that some doctors thought that she might have Asperger's and things like that. And a lot of people have written to me and said, well, Mia is clearly a little bit neurodivergent herself. But that's the kind of thing that I think the parents kind of say, yeah, maybe, but where you are on the spectrum is so functional, like that we don't have to worry about. So we're not going to really deal with that right now, that kind of thing. And
Right.
so
I mean, and
there's
maybe
that
if
triage.
Eugene isn't present in the family, they have time and the bandwidth to deal with Mia or anything
Exactly.
like that. But they don't. The triage of their family is dealing with Eugene, essentially.
Exactly. Exactly.
You know, there's a super harrowing series of scenes in the book where Eugene ends up in a physical altercation with a detective, and it leads to again a series of problems for him and the way he's treated by the police and the way the father's case is viewed by the police. And I was curious how and I find it to be, again, they're very frightening and frustrating scenes to read. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about writing them.
Yeah. So it was interesting because it's one of those things that I wrote, and as I was writing it, I was kind of seeing what was happening in my mind. And I remember at one point when Eugene is kind of like grabbed by the police and something kind of harrowing happens. I remember just like I was sitting here, right here, like where I'm talking to you right now, and just kind of like gasping and being like, and because I did not expect that to happen. And I was actually fighting something like that happening because I didn't want this book to involve lawyers in the same because Miracle Creek did, Miracle
It
Creek
has
was
a
like a
really good
courtroom
lawyer
drama.
character, though.
Yeah,
Like,
I
I
know, I
really like the
know.
lawyer character in it. And I
I
know
know.
you talk about this a bit, in some of the interviews I've read with you, how, you were a lawyer,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
novel writing is like what your fifth career
Yeah.
of all the kind of things you've done. But so I didn't mind the lawyers because what was I think great about The Lawyer was how technically precisely it was written, really. But
Oh, thank
yes,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, but it was really funny because I was just like I was like I don't want another courtroom scene. I don't want to, have this be a legal thriller. And so I was kind of like
Well,
avoiding
it's
that
funny.
whole
I will
thing.
say, from the perspective of having written 10 novels, and I know you've written two, and um, one of the things I'll say is at first I was very precious about not wishing to repeat in any way, as if
Yeah.
people were paying like tons of attention to exactly what I'd done. And
Right.
then you realize at a certain point that there are things that are you, like for John
Yes.
Irving, there are bears. And
Yeah.
for you, it's actually a great strength, I think, um, that you write so I think precisely about the way the legal system can work. And what made those scenes even more harrowing for me is and I think this is unique for your book is that it is set the whole story is set during COVID. And so you can imagine it adds this kind of level of tension in terms of their ability to deal with this case at all.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think is that is for you? That is there like that obsession that you find yourself throughout all 10 books? I can't believe that you've written 10 books. It's just like unbelievable. What do
I
you
mean,
think?
some people still think tomorrow's my debut, and so, and actually
Yeah.
that's fine with me as well. The obsession for me, sometimes, you know, like I would say you could talk about the things that are like items, or just sort of things that happen in books. Like I think I am a little overly obsessed with dying in a car accident. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
there's an
Yeah,
uncommon number of car accidents. I would say that there's a large number of head traumas, people having
yeah.
various
Yes.
kinds of head traumas. These are
Yeah.
obsessions that probably have to do with, but there are other things. But I'll give you a smaller example, which is, for a long time, I thought you really should repeat nothing from book to book.
Mhm.
And yet, inevitably, you end up with the things that are in I
Right.
guess, your deck of cards as a writer.
Yeah.
Um, but then at a certain point, I realized that one of the reasons to repeat things is because you can do them better. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah.
And so I had played with like you perspective, second person perspective
Mhm.
before in the novel that came out just before Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Young Jane Young. And I thought, um, I had done okay with it, but I thought I could do better. And so instead of kind of walking away and saying, I'm never going to write second person again, because I've
Right.
done that as if everybody has a checklist of,
Right. Right.
of,
Right.
of
Right.
things that I've
Yeah.
done. I was like, no, I'm going to write this better. I have more tools now. And if
Right.
I choose to do second person again, it's not a reason to avoid it that you've done it
Right.
before.
No,
It's
not at
actually an
all.
exciting thing to go figure out how to perfect it. And
Yeah.
so I think that ended up becoming, that's, the mark section of the book, the
I
NPC
I was
is a
gonna
section that
say
I
that's
find
I think
really
that's my
memorable.
favorite scene. I think that's my favorite scene from Tomorrow and Tomorrow
And
and
it's
Tomorrow. Yeah.
so the things I had learned from the
Yeah.
first time was that, anytime you decide to do something that's a really big,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess, formal divergence, you
Yeah.
really have to make it work emotionally, and it has to be even more precise than any of the other things you write. And so I knew that like when you ask somebody to go into
Mhm.
something like second person, that is going to be so alienating for them that unless this really really works, it's kind of not worth doing. And so there were things that I knew about how much that needed to land or how it wouldn't land at all
Yeah.
you know and so, but I think a
Do you
younger
feel like
version
do
of
you
me when I was starting out
uh
would not have actually done it again, because I would have been like, well, you did second person that other time. But in fact,
yeah.
I did second person that other time, and I wouldn't say it completely worked, you know?
So I feel like the other reason why that section worked so well is also because it was surprising. It came like, in the middle of the book, right? And it was kind of like late for something kind of like new. And so I feel like sometimes that can have that jarring effect and then have people be
Yeah.
like, okay, so this is different. Why is this different? And then like, and really try to like analyze it at the same time that you're kind of like having to sort of experience it yourself, because it's written in that so there's that
Yeah. And I
intimacy that
think
comes from that.
it was also this sense of knowing, um, at the point that I had written my 10th novel, I realized I knew a lot about reader response. I know like when they're going to slow down, and sometimes you want them to slow down. People think you
Yeah.
just want people to turn pages as fast as possible, but
No.
sometimes I actually want you to pause and like sit with something and think about it a bit.
Right.
And so to know how certain kinds of technique you're going to use are going to change the experience for the reader, to know what that will do. I think when I first started writing, and I was saying, because I had to go back through like my first novel, which has now been 20 years since it came out. And when
Oh,
I went through it again, I was thinking how, if you think of like the 10,000 hours, Malcolm Gladwell
yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing, these are like my first 10,000 words as a
Yeah.
novelist, and so, and I've written a lot more words since then. And so it's like it's literally the very beginning of your kind of novel writing career, and so you do actually learn a lot as you go from having done it,
Yeah.
um so yes, so we've now diverged from
Okay, so
Happiness Falls
I'm
for a
gonna
bit.
tell you. Wait, so this is relevant. I may have told you about this. So since it's like right in front of me, I'm gonna show you this. So on to your first 10,000 words, that kind of idea, or 10,000 hours. It probably didn't take us 10,000 hours to write our first books.
To
Maybe,
write 10,000 words, probably not.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I
But
mean, but I
but
would say I don't hit 10,000 hours as a novelist till quite a bit farther,
right,
till
right,
after
right.
the
No,
first novel,
exactly,
actually,
exactly.
yeah.
Okay, but when I was writing Miracle Creek, I had this sign up. This is not, well, forget the missing person part. This is not a novel. Right in front of me, like right there. So I
Yeah.
was looking at it the entire time, and that was like my telling myself that, look, you're just starting out. This is your first novel. It's probably going to be your practice novel. Like I've heard, a lot of people have practice novels. So I'm going to write this thing, and then I'm going to end up putting it away in a drawer. And then the next novel, or the one after that, like after I've hit my 10,000 hours, whenever that is, like that will be like the real novel. So I had this up, and that's why I felt like free to, like basically begin a murder mystery without knowing who did it or why or anything. And also, like, have 7 POV characters, which, is kind of crazy
Right.
for a first novel, and all that, because I was like, this is not a real novel, so it's fine. And so this was
It
like
just
my,
removes the
like,
pressure from that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then when I was writing Happiness Falls, my husband came in and he was like, honey, you have that sign up that says this is not a novel. I hate to tell you this, but you signed a contract for it. So, and you got paid. So it kind of has to be a novel. So
It's kind
maybe
of a
take that
novel.
off. And so then I was like, I don't really want to take that down because it's like kind of my crutch. So I put this missing person in to remind myself that from Mia's perspective, who, which I was writing from, that this is not a missing person. Not like, this is not a fun story, that it's from her
No,
perspective.
it's a
It's
two
like a
missing
real
person novel.
crisis.
I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, that too. But
Yeah.
it's not a novel. It's not a novel at all, right? And so,
No, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, so fun.
I have a
Yeah.
sign, but my sign is like kind of
Oh,
just
I want
move
to
it.
see.
Um,
What's your
my
sign?
sign, you can't probably see it from here.
No, I
It's
can.
it's some lyrics from a song by Ruth, from a Bright Eye song, and the lyrics
Oh,
are, well, I could have been a famous singer if I had someone else's voice, but failure always sounded better. Let's fuck it up, boys, make some noise. And actually I sit down and I think that, like
yeah,
you can't, you're kind of, you are in the end, the whole thing all of us do as novelists is we are just the voices we are. You
I
can wish all
know.
you want for some other voice. And so I think in a certain way, when I started out as a novelist, I wrote to be other people. Like
Yeah,
I liked being,
totally.
literally, even sometimes they were white blonde girls. I
Yes,
wrote, like, my
exactly.
first novel starred a white blonde girl. And so I would
Yes,
write like as far away from me as possible, just thinking that like I didn't want anyone to possibly like mistake me for any
yeah,
of the people in these books. But then over the years, and fiction was the kind of mask I could wear.
yeah.
But over the years, I became very like a lot less interested in that mask, and to where then I just didn't want to wear the mask at all. And I remember thinking, because I wrote a lot of I wrote a lot of Tomorrow during the pandemic.
Hmm.
And what that gave me was this huge sense of freedom, this feeling that it was like I was writing my first novel again because I wasn't thinking about audience. I was just
Yeah.
thinking like, I don't even know if they'll be publishing after this,
Yeah.
because things were so bleak and so very
Right.
frightening.
Yes.
And so in a sense, I didn't think about any pleasing really anyone but myself at that point
Yeah.
in time. Um,
Which is so
so
cool.
so yeah,
Yeah.
that's my sign.
I love your sign. I love that we both have these signs with these
We
scotch
have little
tapes on
signs.
top
That's
that's
it.
like
Yeah.
tattered. Oh my God. Here,
Yeah.
hold up your sign. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick
Okay.
screenshot. Hold up your sign.
Of our
All right.
signs. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. All right. Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. Maybe they'll cut that out. That's silly. Like
Right.
screenshot part of
It kind of looks
and
like
like
proof of life. Like
no.
maybe we are trying to prove that we are alive on a certain day
Yes.
because we are in some kind of kidnapping situation. These are our signs, you
Yes,
know?
exactly. No, but I also love what you say about like the wearing the mask. So the way that and I'm kind of like following your footsteps, hopefully. And so I'm very, very much at the beginning of this, but for the first two books and all the stories that I've written, I've like I think I told you about this. I can't remember. I do this kind of writing process that I refer to as method writing, kind of like method acting.
Yes, and I think it was so fascinating, because I don't know if people know this about you, but you went to Interlochen Arts Academy, and which is, I know our crowd, I think, will be mainly British, but it's this very
Yeah.
prestigious art school in the U.S. And so I was fascinated with the idea of method writing,
Yeah. So
which
yeah, because
which
I
we
was
will
a
now describe.
so I was a theater person. So, I did a lot of, method acting and that kind of training. And so I didn't start writing until I was in my 40s. So when I started writing, I think it felt comfortable to me to be like, okay, it's kind of like I'm, improvising a scene. And in fact, like that's how I do a lot of my writing, is just kind of like standing up and pacing and back and forth and then just kind of recording myself as I'm kind of acting things out. And so I try to inhabit the POV characters, the point of view characters that I'm writing from. And so when I'm doing that, through my writing process, I feel like I kind of get lost in that person's head, and I can also like feel like I think a little bit differently. And so I feel like one of the things that I do is I like to try to write about things that I'm just puzzled by and mystified by, like, or I don't have the answer to, or even like the basic
Mm.
things of like what did happen to the father, like I don't know, so I had to like write in order to figure it out. And when I'm writing in order to figure things out, I feel like it helps me like as a person to sort of think of the same concepts that maybe have puzzled me, Angie Kim, personally, and think about it in like from somebody else's shoes. And so that I'm kind of like thinking about it slightly differently and thinking about it from like the perspective of somebody who is, a guy instead of, a woman, or white instead of, Asian or black or whatever it is. And doing it that way and with like different life experiences or different age or different job, and that like helps me to like see a different facet of maybe this problem that I've been personally trying to solve for a really long time, and it sometimes like makes things
Yeah.
click in a different way. And so that's like another really cool thing about writing too for me is to sort of do that. But it's interesting that you feel like you used to kind of like come from that perspective of being somebody else, and now like as you're writing more and more that you're more gravitating towards yourself, your true self.
Well, I think most good writers are method writers, even if
Yeah,
they don't
absolutely.
use the term. And
Absolutely.
insofar as, you know, writing is a profoundly empathetic act. It
Mm-hmm.
is, unless you're just writing yourself and you're writing maybe certain memoirists, but I think even a great memoirist is spending some time thinking, how is it to be somebody other than myself? And so I think when I started writing characters, it used to I used to wonder how would I ever people a book with so many different kinds of people, you know?
Mhm.
And at a certain point, I think the realization I had was that the characters you write are always some distance from yourself, you know? And so, but in a sense, you are stuck with yourself as the center of that, with
Yeah,
whatever your privileges and prejudices are. That is where you have to start from, you know? And so everybody you write is some distance from there, you know? And it did make my character writing, I think, better because I had to acknowledge that I was, you know, the flawed center of all of it. You know what
yeah,
I mean? And
yeah,
so, um,
absolutely.
and I think, but I do think it's this kind of, it is, sometimes when I see the discourse in our world, I am scared by the lack of empathy, even among people that, you know, wish to be writers, you know, that
No,
to kind of just like, you know, that it is very useful if you can, and probably all professions, but
yeah,
especially for somebody who wishes to be a writer, to spend some time thinking about why somebody, even somebody you might on the face of it despise, why they might act as they do, you know,
absolutely,
to cut off
absolutely.
empathy, you know. And so, in a sense, I understand because I've read some of the essays that are and some of the writing about the failures of empathy. And
Yeah.
yet, I don't know a better way for writing novels, and I don't know a better way for living in the world, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And also like um and for that as a writing exercise, like doing some of the Rashomon kind of scene writing where like, even if it doesn't make it into the book to actually go ahead and, you know, like write the same scene from various different
Yeah.
people's perspectives and, see how that can differ. I think like exercises like that can be really interesting, like almost like doing scales for, piano, or you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like that kind of an exercise that builds that
Right, it is
muscle.
actually a muscle. It is a
Yeah.
muscle to
Oh
like spend
yeah.
some time again really thinking about what it is to be somebody other than yourself. You know,
Yeah.
what it is to like go through the world. And anyway, um yeah, I think about it, you know, as I when I had been researching for our event, I had come across a review of your book that, you know, had referred to Mia as an unreliable narrator. And it's so
Yeah.
funny because I did not see her that way at all. You know,
Yeah.
she seems, if anything, overly reliable, you
Exactly.
know.
That's
Um,
exactly what I've been telling people, Gabrielle. I have been seriously. People will be like, well, she is a bit of an unreliable narrator. And I think sometimes people don't exactly know what that means. Like they sort of think that
no,
any
I
first
don't think so.
person, is an unreliable narrator. Cause I'm just like, I don't think so.
Right,
She's
we are
actually
all unreliable insofar as we are all narrators of our own stories, telling them from
exactly.
our own points of view, you know.
Yes. Yes. We're all flawed. We sometimes make assumptions that aren't true. But what's interesting about her is that she is actually going overboard in trying to expose her flaws. I think in some ways she is, because of her regret and some of the mistakes that she thinks that she made, that made it harder for them to find their father and things like that. I think because of that she's really hard on herself and she feels guilty, and she is kind of like going out of her way to confess all of the things that she did. And
Right. If anything, she presents herself in such an unflattering light. Like, for
exactly.
instance, in you know, it's not real. It's I won't spoil it, but there's a scene involving cake, you know, and a
Yes.
misunderstanding around cake, and it's one of the saddest scenes in the book. But the way Mia takes pains to present it does not make herself look good, you
No,
know.
no, no.
And you know, so I think that, and it's funny because the related word to unreliable is often unlikable. You
Yes.
know, that a
Yes.
character is an unlikable main character. And I always think that's quite funny as well because, you know, if anything, if you have a first person narrator and they never say anything that makes you dislike them at all, they are unreliable.
Exactly,
You
because
know,
then they're hiding themselves because we as people
right, they are
all have that.
presenting this self that is like perfect. So when
Yes,
you read, and there are plenty of novels from a first person perspective where you're like, I like them, you know, but you have to then doubt that narrator entirely because they are presenting that
absolutely.
story in a very flattering light, you know.
Absolutely. And like and I do feel like when that kind of a narrator is a woman or a girl like that, then I think people are so much harder on them. And
Oh yeah.
I do feel like the sort of unlikable narrator who's the anti-hero, who's a guy, is just so much more revered and, and glorified. And whereas like the women who are just dismissed as, they're just so unlikable. And I just don't understand why in this
Right.
day
If
and
anything,
age
they
we're
don't even
still
get
like
called
that.
unreliable. Just
Yes.
I don't like her. I don't
Yeah.
like her, and
Yeah.
again, we like it so much better when it seems to come from a male perspective, the exact same kind of set of behaviors,
Yeah,
really.
exactly. And what's ironic about all of that is that I think actually the fact that Mia is taking the time to like point out all of her flaws is actually, it shows how much vulnerability she feels, which should make her, I think, more likable, because it should make her, seem more like, yeah, she's gone through this horrible thing and she's learned a lot about herself. And, and she's now sort of realized the flaws that she had. And so she's like presenting them to us in this kind of like take it or leave it kind of way. And the fact that she's able to do that and being so self-aware, I think should make us like her more, like, because she's gone through something and she's being more vulnerable with us. And yet like somehow people are like, oh well, in the beginning she's just so like uppity about things. And I'm like, yeah, because she feels bad about that now, so she's like exaggerating it almost.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying to tell you people the truth. She
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
she's trying to be warts and all about things. And yes, and if anything, that should make her more likable. And I think it's not just first person narrators, because I'll only touch upon it briefly, but the way people speak about Sadie Green sometimes and tomorrow and
I
tomorrow and tomorrow is quite astounding. I think there are a lot of people that read the book and they think and they love the book, but they'll think, but why doesn't that girl just want to get with that nice boy? You know what I mean?
yeah.
They have a complete lack of comfort with women who, and I was like this probably in my 20s, but somebody who wants to be successful more than they want to be kind, which is kind of
Absolutely.
Sadie. And it's many people, I wanted to write about the subject of like female ambition. And, so for many people, this is a subject that they find quite threatening, that again, she is a person who cares more about
Absolutely.
things other than just kind of like being a good friend or a good potential partner to somebody, or that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I was
So at
actually
one point, my
uh-huh.
partner was saying that we should have T-shirts made that were like that said nobody likes Sadie Green.
Oh no,
At
no,
some point.
that is so not true, first of all. So I feel like the same readers who like Mia like Sadie. Like I think I said this
Yeah,
to you.
I think they do.
I think
I
I
think
said
you
this
said it
to
to
you
me. Yeah,
before. Yeah, yeah. That I feel like they would be good friends. Like I feel like, or I feel
I
like
think they
Mia
would be
would.
friends.
Yes, I think Mia would like look up to Sadie and be like, "That's who I want to be." You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, honestly, the standards that, Sadie is in her mid 30s by the end of the book, but the large part of the book she's in her 20s, and, Mia is about the same age. And I would say that the standards we hold female characters to are kind of crazy,
Yeah,
like it's as if, they should somehow be modeling kind of like, again, these kind of admirable qualities for people. And what that does and why that is screwed up is because it doesn't allow us to show women as humans.
exactly.
It's like,
Absolutely.
and sometimes it's not as if it's only men who seem to feel, threatened by Sadie. It seems like women sometimes wish this as well. It's not, what I'm saying, it's not uniquely a gendered response in my mind.
It's not
But
uniquely gendered, but I do feel like that there's a disparity in the kind of reader reaction to those kinds of people. But actually, okay, so that makes me wonder. You're talking about the reader reactions to Sadie, and also you said that like you now know what like readers expect and things. Do you actually like pay attention to, or have you in the past like paid attention to like reader reviews and those kinds of responses and things like that? Or
um, Well,
Is that how
interestingly,
you
my
know?
first novel published before Goodreads were a thing, you know.
Oh,
So
okay.
I have existed in a time before Goodreads,
Wow.
as amazing as that
Wow.
is.
Wow.
But you know, and so I would say when Goodreads comes around, there's a certain point at which I realized that I had read every single kind of negative review that I could possibly read, and that in fact all one-star reviews, they almost always say the same thing no matter what book they're talking about. There's only basically, and I listed them out, there's only like 20
Oh, really?
categories of one star. Yeah.
Okay,
on
what
like
are they?
on
I want to
20.
know. I want to know.
I'll see if I can pull up my notes because it was,
Okay.
I actually pulled this up for somebody recently, but it's like basically don't believe the hype. That's a one-star review. That is
Yes.
a, but no matter
Huge.
what book somebody's talking about, they are always saying the same things, you know, like um, I did not
It's
like the main character. I do not like this
yes.
book. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you didn't
Yeah.
like them as a person. And
Yeah.
so it's so they're basically very much uniform. And so I realized that they weren't super useful in that sense. If
Yeah.
they are the same things that are said, whether it's Happiness Falls or The Great Gatsby or Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, like there are different like nouns
Yeah.
and details,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But then when I'm thinking about it more generously, you know, I would say that sometimes it's tempting to think to yourself, well, Hemingway never had to grapple with Goodreads, you know, and but I realized though that I had actually been exposed to, and maybe I can see it as a semi-positive thing, that I had been exposed to more feedback than Hemingway would ever get in his entire career. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that in a sense
Yeah.
there were things to learn, but it did actually hit a threshold where there were no longer things to learn, if you know what I mean. So
Absolutely. But I want to see your, first of all, I want you to send me that 20
I will send
listing.
you all the categories of negative reviews, you
Right.
know.
But do you
Yes.
feel like that actually like affected any of your writing? Like in the sense that, you know, there would be like any, even if it's like somewhat subconscious or whatever, that you sort of go, well, you know, I remember hearing this kind of a feedback. And so I wonder if I should try writing blah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. Do you feel like it
Um,
affects you in any kind of way?
no, I don't think it does. I mean, I think that, listen, there are like, to get specific, there were times when I realized that an effect I had intended didn't land consistently. But
Right.
that wasn't something you just saw in negative reviews, where something,
Yeah.
so this is earlier, maybe less so with my later books, but earlier, that there were ways, you know, like The Storied Life of AJ Fikry, which was a book that was a really good bestseller.
And also a
You
great
know,
movie. A
there were
great, great
times when,
movie.
oh, thank you. There were
Yeah.
times when I had, you know, should have had a chapter break. I realized that from reading enough reviewer responses that
Yeah.
in fact they
Yeah.
did not understand that time had passed because
Yeah.
I had made a technical error in a small technical error in my perception of how a reader would
Got it.
experience that. So
Yeah.
I think something like that you can get out. But generally
Yeah.
speaking, from looking at you know, many people's responses to something over time, it wasn't something that ever showed up in, say, professional reviews. But what I did come to see was that an average reader had would misunderstand that point. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but no, I think what you realize is none of that's for you in the end. You know what I mean? And so if
Yeah.
you can take it, I think you know, my friend I was having lunch with, who's a, you know, a big a successful writer, he was saying to me that, like, you know, when we were all first like exposed to the internet, if you were at a party and you heard that 50 people in the other room were like, you know, saying things about you, and somebody like your servant came and whispered in your ear, do you want to know what those 50 people are saying? You know, you would be
Yeah.
like, yes, I would like to hear what they're saying, you
Totally.
know.
Yes.
So I've kind
Absolutely.
of like struck a balance as I've gone on between understanding exactly what that's for, thinking sometimes it's marginally interesting to me, or even useful, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like when I say Hemingway never had the level of feedback, like there are ways in which I'm jealous of Hemingway, but there are certainly ways in which, you know, he never had that level of feedback. You know, if he had, people might have noticed, say, that like The Old Man and the Sea was written after he had a serious head trauma, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and so
And
the language
also,
is simpler because he has been shot,
Right.
that kind of thing,
And also not only
Um,
that, but like we know from like how debilitated some of these like old, these writers
mhm.
would get. And I feel like in some ways, like we're like surviving that. We're able to survive that. And I think like we deserve
Yeah.
a bit of a pat on the back. But I do read like not forever, but like in the very beginning of a cycle, like before the book comes out from the early reviewers, I would read like all of them because I do think that there are some things
And
that
then you have to
stand
cut it
out.
off though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, no, no, no.
I
I'm
think.
definitely not doing it anymore. But like at
Yeah.
some point, because I wanted to see like, are there any lessons that we can draw on this for, marketing purposes? So
Right.
like,
I think that's
yeah,
useful.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I do actually think the line in the sand of saying I'm never going to, look at it ever, like, yeah, you should look at it some,
yeah,
but you shouldn't, again, it shouldn't be gutting to you, it
yeah,
shouldn't be as much as you can. And I actually get it even from, when you're starting out as a novelist, and some of my early books weren't that successful, and sometimes the only response you're going to get are reader responses. You're
yeah,
not going it's not going to be reviewed in the New York Times or that kind of thing. And so in a sense you're looking to just even be feel as if like your book exists. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And so I
yeah,
think there are many reasons to look at it. But no, I think a funny thing just to say, like when you look at like Yelp or something,
yeah,
or you look at Yelp reviews, you realize
yeah,
that every single Yelp review is written from the point of view of the person writing it, which is to say,
yeah,
every single Yelp review, whether it's for like a car wash or a passport services place or whatever, it's the story of that person in a
yeah,
memoir form that is about the subject of passports, or that
yeah,
kind of thing, you know,
absolutely.
and and so once you realize that every single kind of like little piece of user data you're looking at, if you happen to happen upon any of them, is that it's just the story of that person, then you feel differently about it too.
You
and,
do,
and I think
but
that matters. It's all not equal, is my point.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
that kind of
But
thing.
and also the other thing with like both Yelp and Goodreads too is that, any of these reviews is that a lot of like there is a preponderance of people who are not happy with that particular product or restaurant or whatever
Yeah,
because
and
it's
you're
those
more likely
people.
to go say, yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah,
they
you're
want to
more likely
actually
to
like
go
vent.
express that.
Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
there is
And I
like
think
that too.
people like are looking also even for community. It's funny because I've studied sort of early internet stuff, and if you look at kind of the way some people enjoy disliking something.
Yes.
People
Oh,
enjoy
totally.
so we can enjoy people who dislike things in ways that are colorful enough for us to, but in fact, disliking something for many people does not actually mean the book was bad. It
Yeah.
means because their whole pleasure is in the kind of like, criticizing this thing, so I
Yeah.
think there are so many ways to look at it. And I have been of the mind where I'm like, I'm never going to look at it ever again, and I'm not going to do that. But I also think that's not healthy. We live in the world we live in,
Yeah.
and you kind of have to, like, I think if it's not gutting to you, it's worth at least a small exploration into the subject. If you can really, again,
Yeah.
contextualize it for yourself at every point in time.
You know
Well,
what
I
I
think, by the way, go
Yeah.
ahead, go
No,
ahead.
I was going to say what I recommend doing every once in a while is going to your Goodreads. This will be overwhelming for you, Gabrielle, because there are so many people who love Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and I'm sure you have like thousands of new reviews a day. But sometimes it can be fun to like go and filter only. So click on the
For
5-star
fives.
reviews
Yeah,
only, just for fives, and the most
yeah,
recent and just like going
yeah.
through and reading pages of them and you're just like, oh, this makes me feel so good, and then like you can go and go about the rest of your day.
Although, because I am the person I am, when I have done that, I can find fault with the 5-star too.
Oh
That you
no,
liked it the
no.
wrong way.
Yes, yes, that is true, that is true. Like, it's so funny. Yes, exactly. Like even though Sadie or Mia, are unlikable characters, I still
Right,
nonetheless love the novel, and you're just like, ah, yeah.
my thing is like if I see somebody say it's a novel about gamers, because it's not a novel about
Yes.
gamers, it's a novel
Yes.
about designers, and
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a thing that like bumps me, I guess, when I encounter it. So I
But
was just gonna
it's not,
say,
but
go
but
ahead.
I would say it's a novel for gamers because like if you love that world, it's kind of like if you're an aficionado in something that you kind of want to see
Mm,
like how it began and how it's and get that behind the scenes look at it. So I think it's fascinating from that perspective. So even though I'm not a game designer, because I do love games, or I used to, when I was younger and all that kind of stuff. I love seeing like I loved the book and that's actually how I got drawn in because I was like,
I
oh,
mean, I think
I
it's a
wanna,
book because I'm not a game designer, and I think
yeah,
it's a book about people that make things,
yes,
and so I think that the number of kind of creative people that respond. But anyway, when I see somebody say that it's a book about gamers, I
yeah,
normally think that they're trying to minimize it. I think it is a book for gamers. It is for people who play,
yes, for
but
gamers,
I don't think
absolutely.
they are form. I don't think Sam or Sadie would identify themselves at gamers. They would say we're artists.
Oh yeah,
And so that was how
absolutely.
I
It's
so that's
of
how I
course.
saw the book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about the creative process, and I hope that they're not being reductive and, saying that in the same sense that I hope that people don't just say that Happiness Falls is a missing person mystery because it's like that's at the core of it. That's like not even at the core of it. The to me, the mystery is kind of the Trojan horse. And then once you're in, then all the things that it's really about, which is language and philosophy and connection and happiness and all of those things, like that's what hopefully makes you, either love it or hate it either way. But that's really what it's really about in the same. And I think that like when people say tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow is a book about or for gamers, like that's just a very reductive like thing, that you can just
Yeah.
like, throw a label on it. But that's not really what it's about. It's about friendship. It's about
No.
relationships. It's about, jealousies and, like how how relationships evolve over time. And it's like about the creative process. And it's about like misogyny in, like any world that where people are trying to innovate. Like it's about innovation. It's about all of those things.
And I think it's as I don't really kind of even care what a book is about anymore. It's funny because when your book was sent to me, I thought to myself, I cannot read even one more missing person story. I was like, I don't know really why this is being sent to me because I don't really, but in the end, I think what I've realized, and I've heard people say this with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow as well. People will talk about when they go to write, like both professional critics and just regular people writing online reviews. At the beginning of the review, they will always like state their relationship to gaming as if we like were making them do this. They'll be like, I
Yes,
have never
yes.
played a video game in my life, or I have played all the video games and I'm such a gamer. And I think it's actually quite a funny thing. I was struck by it when it kept happening. And some of it was because our marketing set them up to do
Yeah.
this, to say like you don't
Yes.
have to be into video games to enjoy this book. But some
Yeah.
of it, seemed to me like this kind of misconception about why we read anything. For
Yeah.
me, you don't read a book about World War II and start out and say, I was never a soldier, I never fought in
Yes.
a war,
Yeah.
and you are fine with that. There are certain subjects that we just feel like we can dismiss. But I think the farther I've gotten as a reader, the less I'm looking for any particular subject. I want to see something I haven't seen before. I want to be taken into a world I haven't, been in before. And I want to hear a brain that isn't a brain that I would meet any other
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And so that's something. In the end, it doesn't matter if it's a missing person story. It's a good book.
Yeah.
It's a good book with memorable characters that has again characters that I have not seen before in this way. And so that's why I was so excited when I read your book. But it was not because it was a missing person story.
Right.
Though
Right.
I think if you love missing people stories, it's also a great one.
Yeah. I don't.
I think
Yeah.
we're,
I'm not
by the
sure.
way,
Yeah.
about at the end of time,
Yeah.
by the way.
Exactly.
So I guess I'll ask you
I've
before we
been going
go,
way
are you
over.
reading anything great right now? Are there any books that you're loving or that you want
Um,
to talk about?
are you reading anything that you're loving right now? So I am busily catching up on all of the books that I'm supposed to be blurbing for 2025. So I hesitate to
Yeah.
say like what they are just because like I haven't because I people won't have heard of them and they won't be available for like a year. What about you? Are
Right.
you reading anything right now that
Well,
you're
it's
loving?
funny. Like I've been reading a ton of books for research, and I'm sort of at the end of that process. But I recently read Tom Lake by Anne Patchett, and I
Yeah, me
hadn't read
too.
anything of Anne Patchett except her memoir, Truth and Beauty,
Yeah.
and I really loved Tom Lake much more than I thought I would. And so now I'm on an Anne Patchett kick where I've like churned through a bunch of her books.
So Bel Canto was a touchstone for me for
Yeah.
like yeah I love that book. I love Tom Lake as well, especially since I'm a theater kid, and I did theater in right outside Traverse City, which is where this which is the
Yeah,
setting
right, yeah.
occurs. So it obviously resonated with me from that perspective. Some of the things that my next book that I'm starting to work on is linked stories, and it's got a dystopian kind of premise to it. And so
Mhm.
I'm doing a lot of rereading of like some of my favorite linked story kinds of things. So I love like Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan and Candy House. So I like just reread those recently and loved it. And I also loved How High We Go in the Dark, which is like linked
Yeah, I
story.
blurbed that book actually.
You
Yeah,
did? Oh
Sequoia
my God, I
Nakamatsu.
love
Yeah,
that. Yeah, I love that.
yeah, it was
I am
really
never going on
moving
a
and
roller coaster ever again after that book. I will say.
yeah, that is a really memorable section of
Right?
that book.
My
Yeah, for
favorite. Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
okay.
no, and obviously Cloud Atlas. I recently
Yes.
reread that again because it has been, I think, 20 years since it came out. So I wrote an introduction for it recently.
Oh,
And I
you
think you have the
did?
same. I did, yeah. It was
I
actually
love
incredibly
that.
daunting to write that introduction because it's a difficult book to talk about. There's so many things
Right?
going on. I really like labored over this thing. But your editor is David Ebershoff, who is also the
Yes.
editor of Cloud
Yes.
Atlas. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 And in fact, actually, I'll show off this. He was also the editor of this, Naoki Higashida's
Yes.
The Reason I Jump, which was translated by David Mitchell. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's a memoir in the form of like short essays by a speller, who's a non-speaker in Japan, and it was written when he was 13. It's unbelievable. So, and that's one of the things that drew me my to my editor David. So I'm really glad that you did that, and I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to read
You
your
know, it's
introduction.
I think there are things about Cloud Atlas that strangely that do remind me a little bit of Happiness Falls, especially in terms of some of the things he's thinking about, which, involving sort of language and I
Yeah,
think
yeah, yeah,
race
yeah.
and all of those, the way they're intersectional.
Absolutely. And I actually recently started rereading that book as well, Cloud Atlas. I just finished rewatching the movie, and then I
Yeah.
just on but I'm only on like page 10 or something, but like it's definitely on my list of things that I need to like reread. So,
Well, it's such a cool book because I think, it's he uses language itself to again move us through time the way like language can fix you like
absolutely.
temporally,
Absolutely.
and I think that's fascinating. So
And also
well, thank
connections
you.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, yes, and connections. Well, thank you so much, Angie Kim. This
Yeah.
was really fun. Thank you to
Oh,
everybody who came to this Fane online event today. um, yeah,
all
hopefully
right.
we'll see each other again soon.
Definitely. And thank you, everybody, for listening, watching. And I am so excited that we got to do this event again, Gabrielle, because
Yeah, it was fun because
I
we
was
just got to
telling
basically
you,
hang out. I kind of forgot it was
yeah,
an event at a certain point, and I was like, "Oh, this
exactly.
is just fun." Yeah,
I love that. And just to share, because when we met at Zibby's that first time, I think I was like in the middle of my book tour and everything. And I just feel like so much has happened since then. So like I can't even remember what you and I talked about. I can only remember like the feeling that I left with it, which is like it was amazing and that I could have talked to you forever and ever and ever. And it felt so short, like way too short. So I'm so glad that we got to do this again because I
Yes.
really felt like I want to enjoy it and be able to remember it fully this time. So yay. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. And again, thank you to Fane Online Events for having us today. Bye.
Bye.